Will the Texas catastrophe finally end the post-Reagan era? Will we finally end the era of laissez-faire, free market economics? Is it really now the time that we see that all these things about somehow the market will take care of things is nothing but a fallacy? There's no market. The market is no God. What we ought to realize right now is that all economies are human-made. And as human-made economies, we can decide how things work. What we've been trying to assert that the market will do something really is nothing more than saying we'll allow those with power to control us all. But let's listen to Krugman, and then we'll take it on the other side, because he said something at the end when we talk about a post-Reagan era that really concerns me, and it's one of the reasons why more than ever, I think, we must ensure that we have independent sources providing us with information other than the cooked data that we hear about all the time. Check this out.
Energy deregulation failed in Texas. In it, Paul writes this, quote, "The collapse of the Texas power grid did not just reveal a few shortcomings. It showed the entire philosophy behind the state's energy policy is wrong. It also showed that the state is run by people who will resort to blatant lies rather than to admit their mistakes. Texas is not the only state with a largely deregulated electricity market. It has, however, pushed deregulation further than anyone else." So, Paul, good morning. If we take a step back, in your estimation, how did Texas get here?
Oh, what they did was they deregulated, which a lot of states have done to some degree. But the thing that's striking about Texas is that there was no precautionary principle. There were no rules requiring that power producers have some reserve capacity. There were no rules requiring that they make that capacity robust. It's perfectly possible to operate it. There are a lot of states that have freezes all the time. They operate their natural gas pipelines. They operate their power plants. They operate their wind turbines right through those freezes. It's not a hard thing to be prepared for that, but Texas didn't do any of that. They just relied upon the market. The magic of the marketplace was going to make sure that everything was fine. And what we've just seen is that that doesn't happen. That if you cannot count just upon the magic of the free market. It's actually even not, it isn't really a free market because it takes an enormous amount of effort to create a sort of market there. It just isn't good enough, and the result is a deadly, incredibly destructive disaster.
Paul, I wanted to ask you, Mark Lilla a couple of years ago wrote about how we've lived through the FDR dispensation from 32 to 80, the Reagan dispensation from 80 to, when he wrote his book, it was 2017. He suspected it was coming to an end. I'm wondering whether Texas isn't a bookend of sorts to Reaganism, 40 years later, the excesses of Reaganism, and if that doesn't bring us well, we're already moving possibly into a new era, that sort of a post-Reagan era.
Well, I have stopped believing that I really understand where U.S. politics is going. And there have been so many catastrophes. I mean, you would have thought that the California electricity crisis, which was even more outrageous because it was outright market manipulation, and that was in 2000, 2001, that would have put a bookend to this fixation on deregulation. You would have thought that the financial crisis with runaway banks and runaway financial contracts that nobody understood, that basically brought the world economy to its knees, brought us down. So I'm giving up assuming that just because events happen. And look, if you look at the people running Texas, they took a look at what was obviously a failure of their free market policies and said, the Green New Deal did it. Larry Kudlow went on TV the other day and said, this is Joe Biden's fault. So how am I supposed to believe that just because the facts say that this was a terrible mistake, that the political system is actually going to learn anything from it?
Now we spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, Now, Krugman is a well-known economist. He's a darn good economist. The one thing I hate about the end of that segment that I just did is that Krugman sound almost like he's throwing his hands up in the air, like saying, "Oh, people are just going to do what they're going to do because this should have ended a long time ago." Folks, let me tell you, after 2000, I remember those electrical issues with California when they were ripping people off, and the same kind of spikes that you saw in Texas with the grid. Same thing happened in California, and people thought, oh, they would learn their lessons that deregulated markets don't work. Then we had the meltdown in 2008 where the entire free market system was about to freeze because of credit default swaps and all these issues. And people said, this is going to be the end of capitalism as we know it, which it should have been. But it wasn't because, well, I'm going to tell you. Then we had this stuff with Texas. And Texas, since it's so fresh, we can understand exactly why Krugman said what he said. Because, oh, things seem to not change. They don't change because those of us who have the real message, those of us who are willing to tell the truth, many times too often throw our hands up in the air and say, it is too difficult to try to convince all those people out there that they're being lied to, and the other guys are such blatant liars that they will be able to convince people otherwise. I remember after 2008, the plutocracy was fearful that this was going to be the end of capitalism as we know it. It was going to be now going forward a very regulated type of economy, which it should be based on those instruments that's nothing more than regulated, or rather nothing more than legalized gambling. They thought it was the end. But what they did is they had a concerted effort to reverse the blame. The blame was now on the people they hurt. The blame after 2008 became credit default swap because people who couldn't afford homes were purchasing homes and the government allowed them to do it. It wasn't that these guys were crooks. It was somehow we, the people, decided to buy homes we couldn't afford, and the government forced them to give us loan. It was a complete lie, but people believed it. The same thing is happening here in Texas. Texas free market with their energy completely failed, collapsed. And what's the first thing that the governor says? He says, Green New Deal, Green New Deal. And he put that message out so quickly. He put that message out faster than we were able to put out the message that said, hey, deregulation failed. Not doing your job failed. They were ahead of the game in saying it was the Green New Deal that caused the problem. They were ahead of the game in, as the guy said, it was Joe Biden who created this problem. What this shows you, it's messaging. It's getting ahead. It's not ever giving up. It's having faith that you can get into the messaging fight and then use reality to tell the truth. Our problem is that the first time something goes wrong and the other side lies with impunity, we decide to say, okay, people gonna believe them. Let's just go into folks. Independent media. This is why we're needed. Progressive media. This is why we need it. This is the reason why we have to be in the game. Krugman, I love Krugman. But the end of that segment where he says, I've given up deciding what the political system is going to do. You don't give up what the political system is going to do. You be a part of the political system and you ensure that it does what it needs to do. But you have to do it. We have to do it. It can't be Krugman. It can't be just me. It can't be just Krugman. It can't be just you. It has to be we. But folks, we can't ever sit back and believe, oh, there's no other choice. Let's get into the game. We'll win some, we'll lose a few. We'll win most, we'll lose a few. But we stay in the game and we fight with resolve. And we are the truthful ones. And we always permanently called out the lies. The reason I'm not dropping the Texas grid is because these guys screwed up, and we ought to keep it in the minds of people and not let them redefine the message. Every day, they screwed up Texas. The Texas catastrophe was caused by the way Republicans run the government. The Texas healthcare catastrophe was caused by the way Republicans ran the state. The COVID catastrophe was formed by the way they ran the system. It was they who did it. And that's the message we all must take. Folks, engage. We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.